Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Uma Mishra-Newberry. I am the Executive Director of Women's March Global. Today, we are featuring another webinar in our partnership with Stand with Kashmir. Starting on the 13th of September 2019, Women's March Global and Stand with Kashmir launched a mini course webinar series on the current crisis in Kashmir. And the webinar series is a space for anyone who wants to learn about the ongoing situation in Kashmir, as well as the history leading up to present day Kashmir. The most densely militarized region in the world, Kashmir is in the midst of an incredible conflict and struggle. The mini course encompasses a range of topics and speakers in an effort to share knowledge and educate people on the complexity and the history of conflict. And in the past 6 months, we have featured topics on why is Kashmir the most dangerous place on earth, how to survive in the world's most militarized zone, what daily life under occupation looks like, and sexual warfare, and what women and resistance in Kashmir looks like. Today, our topic is the place of Kashmir in Bollywood, violent nationalism and colonial fantasy. And I am really grateful today to have with me two really esteemed people who are working in this space. Professor Ananya Jahanara Kabir and Harris Zargar. So Ananya, I would love for you to introduce yourself first and just give a little bit of intro and background to yourself if you can.
Thanks, Uma, and hi, Harris. It's nice to be here with all of us. I don't know how many people have sort of joined us, but I know quite a few were interested. So it's a good use of the technology that we are forced to have to use these days. Right, so I'm Ananya Kabir. I am Professor of English Literature based at King's College London. But I've worked on Kashmir actually for quite a while now. 10 years ago, I wrote a book, Territory of Desire. We'll talk about that, I'm sure, in a bit. But just to say that that was, in a way, the culmination of almost a decade of fieldwork and library-based research I had done on the topic of Kashmir. And since then, while I have published follow-up pieces from there, but I've really kind of been very happy to be in a role of mentor and observer and guide of a number of people working on issues around the representation of Kashmir and cultural politics of Kashmir, because I really wanted my book to open out that space, and I'm very happy to be involved in a number of collaborative and behind the scenes projects as well. And of course, the situation recently has made us all, with any expertise in Kashmir, have to jump on board and see what we can do to guide discourse back to where it should be, really.
Thank you so much, Ananya. And Haris, can you please introduce yourself?
Hi, Uma. Hi, Ananya. Good to have you guys, and thank you for having me. I'm a Ph.D. researcher at the International Institute of Social Studies in Hague, and I work on social movements and insurgency in Kashmir and looking at aspects of land and agrarian politics as well, primarily focusing on Kashmir. I'm by profession a journalist and come from Kashmir, from the capital. So that should sort of reveal why I'm quite interested in the subject and why I work and research on this topic. I have been working in between Delhi and Srinagar, but primarily I have worked as a political correspondent in Delhi and looking at India's national politics. And now I'm based in Netherlands now. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Haris. I want to just let everybody know that throughout the course of this webinar, if you do have questions, please post them in the chat if you are on Zoom with us. Additionally, if you are following us on YouTube, as we are not able to live stream on Facebook due to tech issues, so we're on YouTube today, and you are watching on our Facebook page through YouTube, I know a lot of weird technical navigation, please post any questions that you have there, and I will definitely have a look at them and present them if we have the time. So we're going to go into the question and answer session. So Ananya, I want to start with you first. You've written about the history of Indian cinema in Kashmir, especially in the 1950s and 1960s, in your book, Territory of Desire, Representing the Valley of Kashmir. Can you talk a bit about your book and what you discovered was the intent of these films that were made during that time?
Yeah. The book that I wrote really was premised on a very simple question. Why is it that Kashmir became a space so intensely desired by one, and indeed not just one, two new nations of the subcontinent, India and Pakistan? And what are Kashmiri, indigenous Kashmiri responses to that desire? So it's a book which wants to probe, what seems to be a very kind of political conflict, but through the secret politics of desire, through structures of fantasy, to looking at a lens that probes discourse through psychoanalytical and, kind of literary critical perspectives, reading techniques. But of course, I looked at much more than literature. When you start to ask about where did this fantasy of Kashmir as a space which everyone desires, where did it belong? I think from popular cultural perspectives, our limit horizon seems to be a certain moment in Bollywood cinema. The 1960s Kashmir films. There was a whole genre of them, and they're kind of embedded in our collective memory as the space where, a youthful kind of Shammi Kapoor and his kind of Audrey Hepburn-esque heroines gamboled in the snow, discovering kind of a whole new vocabulary of love, of kind of modernity, rock and roll and tennis whites and fast cars and zooming from Bombay to Kashmir and, kind of undergoing certain transformations and then coming back to like everything sorted out. This is a classic pastoral structure, and a place which is not urban, it's away from urban modernity, but it's linked to it. And it's very essential for the kind of development of a certain kind of subjectivity, which we can call a youthful post-colonial Indian modern subjectivity. So these 1960s films, I'm thinking about Jungli, 1961. I'm thinking about Kashmir Ki Kali, 1963, Jab Jab Phool Khile, 1965. There was like a whole genre of them. They were also, incidentally, the first films to go in Eastman color. So they were like really, when Bollywood became color, Kashmir was its first subject. So these are very important things, very important moments in reconstructing a history of that development of Kashmir as a fantasy zone. So my book tried to probe that. What I also then realized and showed in the book is that while these films are really about fun and escapism, they are also helping us escape or turn eyes away from a very complicated political moment in Kashmir. The 1960s were the moment where Jammu and Kashmir was becoming federated into a federating structure, all told, in India. So everything was very unstable. And there were wars with Pakistan, not one, but two, China. This is a very, very complex geopolitical moment. Some situations which we take for granted are coming into formation. And it is precisely at this moment that these crazily fun-filled films are emerging to divert, yet insist on Kashmir. So this was one of the tasks that my book was probing, to give us an idea of the starting point. But the second thing that was very important, and that takes us back to the colonial fantasy issue, I linked that obsession with Kashmir as this post-colonial escapist playground for modern India in the 60s, back to the start, really, of a colonial romance with the camera and landscape, which started in Kashmir. So my book did a lot of primary research on how this view of the lake, the Dal Lake with the Shikara, the overarching mountains framing the lake, which have become very iconic in the way we think about Kashmir's beauty and consume that beauty, that actually started at a certain point. So my book probed that, discovered that starting point, and located it within the birth of high altitude adventure photography anywhere in the world. And that happened in Kashmir when the colonial photographers went there in like crazy cavalcades or donkeys with colloidal apparatuses, darkroom tents. And, they went up there through the Banihal Pass into the Valley of Kashmir and photographed these images. And they became circulated as the quintessential space of fantasy or beauty. But for me, and that's the thing which I really worked on in the book, there was also a connection with trauma and a connection with melancholia and a connection with trying to forget some things and fixate on other things. And that structure of diversion, elusiveness, and insistence we see in the 1916s. That they read the films, now take the camera's fixed image and make a moving image out of it, make a cinematic kind of story out of that inheritance. So that was pretty much a lot of what the book did. There were other things too, but we'll just focus on the cinema part.
Thank you so much, Ananya. I know it's so difficult to pack that into 5 minutes. Everything your book encompasses. So I appreciate you trying to do that. Haris, in an article which you recently in February wrote for the New Frame, you mentioned how Indian cinema's fixation with Kashmir's beauty ended with oh my God, I've just forgotten the name.
Roja.
But when Roja was released, shifted vis-a-vis how Kashmiris were represented in the 90s and onwards, and why?
Yeah, I'm actually going to build on what Ananya just said, how Kashmir was looked at this colonial fantasy. Pretty much how Kashmir has been seen before the advent of armed insurgency in Kashmir and post that is it can be pretty much summed up. It was just through a colonial gaze, and this perspective of colonial gaze is a key component of how the Indian state and those who associate with this saw themselves in this nation building project. There was the caricature of Kashmiri before 90s was this simpleton and was pretty much not in the picture. The Kashmir was pretty much the space where Indians could navigate, to romance and enjoy the scenic beauty of the place. It was devoid of its politics, its conflict with Pakistan and everything else. Films like Kashmir Ki Kali, Jab Jab Phool Khile, Noori, these are the classic examples of that. What it essentially was trying to portray was that, essentially the conflict or the larger geopolitics of the place was largely between India and Pakistan, and Kashmiris are these passive subjects that perhaps will have to follow with what the nations would decide at the end of the day. And in the meantime, we should just focus on its beauty, on its locale, on its pristine waters, on its greenery, what it has to offer to us. It dramatically changes when Kashmiris take up arms and start to assert themselves as this political force who are now asking for a seat among the two nuclear powers. Not nuclear powers then, but certainly saw themselves as regional powers. And there, the project of which was primarily to sort of show how the canvas of the project completely shifted, and Roja was perhaps one of the first movies which became quite hit, and it sort of mainstreamed shows the mainstream politics of India on Kashmir. There are perhaps many more examples, but Roja comes out as a glaring one. And what it did after that was that it started juxtaposing Kashmiri Muslim with this idea that who are culturally, who are politically, who are socially antagonist to the idea of this nation building which India wants to create, of the secular, encompassing, big democratic nation or a Hindu nation. So you had to sort of, the filmmakers took it upon themselves, not all perhaps for sure, some of them who believed in this idea of Hindu nation, Hindu nationhood, took it upon themselves, became part of this Hindu nationalistic project, complicit, participants in showing how Kashmiri Muslims were sort of these, threat to this idea of Hindu nation, Hindutva. Uh, and in this caricature, how Kashmiri was shown, it's the language, the colloquial language that was used, the the dress up, the canvas, the lighting, the music, every aspect of it was sort of caricatured in a way that it sort of resembles more like Pakistan rather than how the Indian masses see Kashmir. So I think I lost the connection in between. Am I still audible?
Yes, you're still audible. Yes.
Yeah. So thereafter, you see a very strong shift in how the Indian mainstream Bollywood. I wouldn't say that for the whole Indian cinema, regional cinema. That perhaps I'm not privy of that kind of movies, but pretty much the mainstream Bollywood largely showcased Kashmiri Muslims essentially as these conflated with terrorism, radical Islam. It was caricatured in a way. The dress up, the language, everything was to showcase like how they are antagonistic to the idea of Hindu nation, yeah, which the state wants to build, yeah.
Thank you so much, Haris, for that. Ananya, we definitely have to talk about the role that Islamophobia plays. But more specifically to this, what does the role of Islamophobia play more generally in terms of portrayals of Indian Muslims in Bollywood, but then also Kashmiri Muslims?
Yeah. So building up again on what Haris already started talking about via the precise example of Roja, I think we've got to remember, and I think you all agree, that popular cinema in India, of which Bollywood is obviously leading the pack, but we've got all the other regional industries as well. Roja comes from there, but I think popular cinema really has always been the space where all these fantasies and anxieties around Indian Muslims have been played out. And because those anxieties and fantasies have shifted in time, we're talking about 70 years now and more of independence. So we have evolution. So, we've got Amar Akbar Anthony, one moment. We've got My Name is Khan, another moment. We have Gully Boy today, present moment. So you've got it's in itself, you've got an evolving history of how the Indian Muslim has been represented in Bollywood. But one thing remains constant. This is the space where those anxieties are played out, right? Now, when we then think about, there are two issues here. We've got the Kashmir issue, and we've got India and India's issues with Muslims. There are overlaps, but they are very, very important separations as well. There are two different trajectories of issues. So the intersection is in the shared religiosity, right? But what's very interesting is that if we go back to the 1960s films as the first phase, where there is this co-optation of Kashmiris into a sustained narrativization through Bollywood. In that phase, we don't find, I think Haris already mentioned this, we actually don't see we don't actually see much engagement with the religiosity of Kashmiris. We have, when they are there, they're props to the main narrative going on. They are simpletons, absolutely, they're shepherds, they're young, they're artless Kashmiri girls, Kashmir ki Kali. They have very little agency, but what descriptive charge is given them is always to do with the kind of folk ethnicity. There's a Kashmiriness of culture, but they're very ambivalent about pinning it down to Islam. No, none of the protagonists' names are clearly Muslim. They're like something diminutive, like Raju, or something which can go either way. So now, when we then come to the 70s and the 80s, there's a break, and where Kashmir comes in the filmscape is as a backdrop for songs. As in Bobby, or so you've got the presence of the pastoral element, but it's receded to just a background for the song element. In the 90s, it resurges. We return. So this is a kind of phase 2 of using Kashmir in Bollywood, and that phase coincides with the rise of Islamophobia and certain discourses, both nationally and internationally, around Islam. 1992 Babri Masjid, of course, and then we've got capping it 9/11 on the other side. So, we've got a sustained attention being paid to Islam as a cultural problem, as a civilizational issue, as a fear-producing issue, and othering. So all these issues then start, interestingly, being cannibalized, I think, by Bollywood and segued into its continuing interest in trying to deal with the Kashmir problem. So now we get a new set of films: Roja, Mission Kashmir, Yahan. There are quite a few films like this that Roja certainly starts off with. And these films, I think, have in common a kind of, unlike the earlier 60s phase, the Kashmiris are Muslims now. You cannot escape that. In fact, they're ridiculously Muslim. They're not even, of course, Kashmiris are Muslim. There is but their Islam is also connected with the ethnicity in a way that if you wanted to be like true to it, you'd find different ways of talking about it. Instead, they are caricatured. There's a lot of like Arabic prefixes, al-jihad, al-this, al-sami, al-that. It's just ridiculous. It doesn't bear real correspondence to how Kashmiri Islam expresses itself. But there is a kind of coalescence with fears around good Muslims and bad Muslims, acceptable Muslims, recuperable Muslims, the kind of Muslim that should be the ideal Indian Muslim. And the Kashmiri situation is used to feed into that picture. Once again, we see that we are not doing justice to what is specific about Kashmir. And there is no film that even, I would say, complex films like Mission Kashmir and Roja that started a trend fall back into some simplistic narrative conclusions and simplistic character depictions to deal with this whole panoply of fears and anxieties around the idea of Islam that geopolitics nationally and internationally produced by the 1990s.
Thank you so much for that breakdown, Ananya. Haris, can you expand on this, just moving towards more recent times, and give some of your thoughts around some of the more recent films on Kashmir? For example, Haider. Haider itself is contested because some feel it's somewhat a sympathetic account that shows some of the violence that happens in Kashmir. How do you respond to that? And how would critical viewers need to engage with a film like Haider?
In my own humble opinion, I personally have a lot of problem with movies like Haider, especially, which sort of comes as this true representation of Kashmir politics, of the Kashmir political landscape, social landscape. Movies like Haider, they layer a lot of problematic narratives and present a facade of showing reality in garb of simplifying narrative or juxtaposing narratives, which I found was very problem. I'll give an example of what I'm trying to say. So basically, Haider is all about revenge. Again, it's an adaptation from Hamlet. There is definitely a concept of vengeance, but how it was weaved into the Kashmir narrative, the whole, again, the agency, the point of agency. Are Kashmiris given agency in films before 90s and after 90s? Pretty much no. The agency that is exhibited is primarily, there is a huge influence of Pakistani element. There is you'll find someone like Ruhdar influencing the main lead. There is always this person in the or a big state in the back which is misguiding the main Kashmiris, who otherwise is very simple, wants to be with the whole, agrees with the idea of India, unified India. It's just that he gets somewhat infected with this something which is not normal to this Kashmiri person. So agency is still not completely there. What if you see movies like Haider, what they do is, okay, there was a certain element of how it showed cases of disappearances, of the issue of half widows. But when you, by the end of when you finish the movie, you realize the layers of other subtle narratives it was building on. For example, primarily initially the whole movie, you will find very few minutes given to the Indian military on the canvas. They come initially in the picture first half of the movie, and pretty much acts in retaliation, and how they, one of the soldiers protects, safeguards his colleague, running away from the militants who are fighting. Then in the whole movie you won't find a single military jackboot. They just completely vanishes. The militarization which is shown in the first part of the movie, it just completely. Then again, when the layers of stories are lifted, you realize it's basically Kashmiris fighting against Kashmiri, an infected Kashmiri fighting against a Kashmiri infected with religiosity or a religious ideology, then fighting against a Kashmiri who is simpleton. And it's actually the cases of mass rapes, or the cases of disappearances are actually shown by either the Ikhwan, who were the pro-India militias, or by the JK police, and in a very covert way. There is no subtle sense in that. In fact, Haider, so the main lead in the movies, his uncle is the one who delivers his father to the police to the Ikhwan to be killed. Shows for his love for the wife. Essentially, just completely, it takes the whole politics, why people are asserting their politics for the larger nationhood, just reduces it to family squabbles. And that's problematic. Again, you see how the caricatures were built. Khurram, the name of the actor who plays the villain in the movie, if you have an idea of how of Kashmiri socio-political, or the civil society groups, you will realize there are people who you can relate to these villainous characters, how they manipulate local Kashmiris, how they manipulate conflict for their own purpose. So I think the case for pretty much all I cannot think of any movie which perhaps does justice to how the reality can be shown for the larger masses. I think Amir Bashir's I don't remember the name, Harud was a decent attempt at making a movie, an alternative movie, but again, it's not mainstream Bollywood. He had to take, it wasn't shown in the cinemas, perhaps for a very short period. But again, then it again falls in that trap of juxtaposing militants who take up armed movement, shown them in the canvas of larger this radical Islamic. So, for example, in Harud, it talks about suicide bombings, which never primarily happened the way it was shown in Harud itself. But that said, again, coming back to Bollywood, there is pretty much there are always layers to layers. If on this face of it, it seems a sympathetic tone. There seems a sympathetic tone, but if you leave the layers, it leaves a very bad taste, especially for those who understand the larger politics or the political landscape of Kashmir. But why it is done, again, we have to understand the audience for films like Haider is still the Indian masses. Now, because of this advent of social media, the proliferation of mainstream media is such that you can't stop the news. So you have to accept certain aspect of what is happening in Kashmir, and that you have to show. Otherwise, you will be continued. If you won't be taken as a senior filmmaker if you don't, showcase that any longer, or if you don't highlight. But then you have to look at the politics of how it is put into the canvas. And yeah, so yeah, that's it.
We'll definitely get Haris to the one of the things that I do want to ask you at the end of this is, what are some good examples in this context? So definitely we will get to that. But Ananya, I want to just move to you, and can you say a bit about the simplicity of Bollywood overall in the history, and also very much the current moment that India is currently in, and the Hindu nationalist project. I mean, especially right now with COVID, we see the insane rise of Islamophobia. It's
Yeah.
yeah, I will let you continue.
Well, for me, the camera as an apparatus, of representation is always complicit. It's complicit with modernity, with its glories, with its melancholias, with its with everything. We can't. It's not a clean. It's not an innocent, way of technological mode of representing anything. So I think that's my starting point. And then when you have an industry like Bollywood, which has capitalized on nation building and has been intrinsically involved in nation building on so many levels, how can you, the big question is, can you ever make a Kashmir film from within the popular cinematic apparatus of India? I really find it difficult. You cannot, because so the best the film can do is make a meta commentary on its own impossibility. That is what Mission Kashmir does, for example. I agree completely that in the end, it's a family squabble. I mean, this is another irritating thing. They all end up with family squabbles. They all end up with psychoanalytical disorders, but what the question which came from Khalid Wasim right now in the chat is like, what about Kashmiris watching these films? Just to say that I went to Kashmir 15 years ago for the first time, fully expecting everybody to say they hate all the Kashmir films, But many people actually said they remembered many positive things about that time when people were coming. There was a certain cosmopolitanism when the film industry, with Shami Kapoor was around. People had embedded certain songs in particular within their own narratives of how they remembered that time. I realized the matter was more complex than that. And people like Abir Bazaz, with their very interesting film, Abir and Minu did, Paradise on a River of Hell, taught me a lot about how it's not just about the Kashmiri being gazed at, but the Kashmiri has agency to return the gaze back. The question is, what's the apparatus? What's the technology? What's the format they're going to use? And the all-encompassing nature of Bollywood's complicity, which today is becoming worse and worse, means that there's very little scope, very little space in that cinematic surface for rupture to happen. It can happen. I feel it does happen in all these films. It happens particularly when increasingly we hear koshul, we hear the language of Kashmir, even in phrases, folk songs embedded into certain then kind of, like Bumro, and these are all crazy, again, very silly, sanitized versions. But we are still, when someone says Azadi for the first time in Roja, we hear that word. There is a rupture. Whether the sanitization of cinema, its overall complicity, the way people are schooled to see things, their stupidities, sorry for a very banal word, doesn't want to see, or their blindness, doesn't want to see the rupture, doesn't want to sense it, but the rupture can be there. It can be inserted. And those are the moments that I, as a literary critic and hopeful for an optimistic politics of recuperation, will look at those moments. Can something be recuperated? How would a Kashmiri view those moments? Can a counter representational strategy derive? Where can that go? So for me, yeah, remember in Mission Kashmir also, there was this very interesting moment where the dialogue is put into the mouth of one of Altaf's terrorist friends. Wars are not fought by guns. Wars are fought by the camera. Now, the fact is that somebody allowed that statement to get out there. Somebody couldn't help make Azadi come into the sound track or the cinematography of Roja. Some things cannot be repressed. Even the anodyne surface of popular Bollywood cinema has to accept the pressure of reality on it. We've now got to see what's the conscience of the viewer. And that will differ. Who is the viewer? Who is viewing it? So that's the way I would really answer the question of complicity, not just in Bollywood, but in cinema in general, but certainly specifically for Bollywood.
Thank you so much, Ananya. I just want to note, Alice, before I move to you for the last question, for those of you who are watching on YouTube and Zoom, please continue submitting your questions. I am taking note of them and will ask them at the end. So Alice, just one last question before we get to the Q&A from those who are watching. Have Kashmiris taken control of their own narrative cinematically? And although they may not be mainstream, can you give us some good examples of what people should be watching?
I think it would be an exaggeration to say that we have taken the narrative cinematically on our own. There have been attempts, I would say, but to actually match the scope and the audience of Bollywood, it's definitely not there. There have been very few independent filmmakers who have been making movies, especially in the non-fiction genre, who've been producing documentary films. Uh, I can't, I don't remember on my fingertips the names of some of these movies, but there are certainly some independent filmmakers who have made films which have tried to sort of shift away from the mainstream Bollywood narratives. Again, do they tackle the issue of the larger politics of the valley? Again, I have a very skeptical view. No, they don't. They largely, again, try to sort of take a deviation from how Bollywood portrays the larger culture, the society, and they sort of tackle those issues in their cinematic expression there. Uh, there haven't been really. I guess perhaps it's the medium which makes it a bit difficult. The kind of resources, the kind of logistics it requires, the kind of manpower it requires. I think that perhaps hasn't happened. Maybe in future we might see that happening, uh, but compared to how what we have on the other side, which is Bollywood, imagine its reach not just in the in mainland India, but globally. It has huge, I mean, resources at its disposal. Uh, in terms of whether narratives can be challenged, I think there are other ways of how people are expressing, perhaps through short film. TikTok, for example, has become a good medium to express, show some cinematic expression, or Instagram for that matter, but but not at this scope of cinema per se. Yeah.
Sorry, everybody, trying to juggle between two
Yeah.
different.
I was typing some answers there, and I was.
That happens. Not enough hand. Haris, thank you so much for that breakdown. I'm going to now just I'm taking a look at the questions that have come in. And Ananya, I want to start with you with one question that came in on our Zoom webinar here. How does one who is oppressed and occupied comprehend the film which is made on the events which he or she has witnessed? And Khalid, you had asked this, but one of our questions is: are you referencing a specific film here? Are you referencing Haider or Roja? Ananya, do you want to just take a crack at this question?
Yeah, sure, of course. I mean, for me, again, I would always see it as the possibility of reading a text in different ways. That's what I'm trained to do as a literary critic anyway. In this case, we are looking at a text which has different audiences with different political and emotional attachments to the subject matter. And so I do feel that there can be a range of responses, some of which one would expect, and some which, as I said, from my own interaction with Kashmiri people over a number of years, I was quite surprised by, because of course we expect, I mean, from our standpoint, we would expect deep anger, deep, discomfort, and like why is one always being made the subject of somebody else's story? Why are we being erased from our own land? Why? So that is kind of that's the first layer of an obvious response that, to use Harris's metaphor of layers. But I think what was very surprising for me are those other possibilities, which I think, again, Khalid suggested this idea of negotiated reading in one of his comments. Absolutely. There is a way of seeing your own space reflected on this canvas. And then I think it's possible, it should be possible, and it is always possible, to mount counter readings, then counter responses. Take a sense of, seize your own agency from the own attempt at representing you, and cumulatively force that representation to change, which is what happened when the weight of the changed political situation made the cinematic surface of the beautiful Dal Lake go up in smoke at the very first frame of Mission Kashmir. So I think that the negotiated readings that Kashmiris make need not be only in the form of other films that respond. It could be, as you say, all these new social media guerrilla tactics of intervening, but also political responses. Who cannot say that the politics of Kashmir have not been shaped by the constant viewing of oneself in the mirror of Bollywood? That itself is a building of agency through this kind of desire to not be represented like that anymore. So you take a stone and you throw it back at the screen, but it's your stone. It's a stone that comes out of your earth and your land. So I think we have to broaden our sense of what is agency, what is counter-representation, and what is resistance.
Thank you so much, Ananya. Haris, I want to just forward a question to you that came in. And this is, I think, a pertinent one, given that your article in the New Frame, How Bollywood Furthers India's Hindu Nationalism. So I think this question is very relevant. How do these problematic Bollywood movies on Kashmir impact how Indians feel towards Kashmir? And how do we change this?
I think this is a very important aspect of why Bollywood makes what it makes. We have to understand that Bollywood in the Indian political and entertainment landscape is a very strong influential medium, and it's not often what art mimics the society. It's also what society mimics art sometime, and there is I think enough reasons for us to believe that what the media, what the entertainment industry showcases is sort of absorbed by the larger Indian masses, who, for all the good and bad reasons, love Bollywood. So it does matter how Bollywood represents Kashmir. As somebody who is living in a very remote pocket in Madhya Pradesh, in Bihar, perhaps may not be able to himself or herself come and visit Kashmir, and for that person, Bollywood becomes becomes that that painting or that entry point to Kashmir. And as someone as young as teenagers or younger than that are exposed to Bollywood at a very young age, they're not a news medium can give you a completely different narrative on the politics. But when somebody when you're exposed to something like Bollywood songs at a very young age, so it's the inception of how Kashmir should be looked starts at a very young age, and it builds over a period of time. So it really matters how Bollywood represents Kashmir and Kashmiris themselves. So when you sort of juxtapose the image of Kashmiri somewhat more culturally and politically linked with Arabs or with Pakistan, it immediately starts creating that antagonistic feeling among the larger Indian masses, who perhaps may not even meet a Kashmiri in their life. So it provides that that window of opportunity for the lot of delinked or sort of masses who are completely away from the larger or daily politics of Kashmir. So in that sense, it is very important not only just to highlight what is the problematics with the Bollywood, with the representation of Kashmiris in Bollywood, but it's also to sort of deconstruct the whole idea behind it, is to show that it plays into the larger politics of right-wing radical politicians. And there is now a complicit alliance of Bollywood producers, actors with the state and the right-wing politicians. So these are layers we have to understand and talk about these things. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you so much. Ananya, this question came in earlier on Zoom, and so I'm going to ask you it. It's, oh my goodness, Lost the question. Anna. Okay. I'm trying to understand why Kashmiris are portrayed this way, not only in Bollywood, but also in other industries. Roja being a Tamil movie, how do you explain that?
That was such an interesting moment when Mani Ratnam, decided to do this, to make this film happen, because many things happened through that film. It was not just a Tamil filmmaker taking on the subject of Kashmir, but it was also then a popularization of a Tamil film onto the national sort of like imaginary. And then it got dubbed, and then A.R. Rahman became really popular because of that film too. So there was a trilogy of films really that Mani Ratnam did, of which Roja was the first. Roja, Bombay, and Dil Se. And I find those films should be seen as an entity, literally as a trilogy, where I think Roja represents quite a naive attempt of Mani Ratnam to just be this it was well meant, but it was coming from a southern perspective. It was this Tamil filmmaker wanting to take on something which is from north of the Vindhyas to present a new version of updated version of what Tamilness is. So in that dealing again with the self vis-a-vis the question of India, same old pattern. Let's take the Kashmiri into this space and mobilize what Kashmir is to make me understand myself within the larger Indian project. Now, obviously, if that's already your agenda, you're not going to be thinking about, let me also represent Kashmiris in some sort of a sympathetic way. I mean, you are just using the Kashmiri as a foil. Naturally, you're going to go back to an accumulated meta discourse on how Kashmiris have been presented in Bollywood because you're using a shorthand. So that you let North Indian viewers or other Tamil, whatever, you are showing yourself. They are just a foil to you. We are not deviating from that old pattern at all. So it actually is a moot point. Why should Mani Ratnam be interested in that film to show Kashmiris that Kashmir? He's only interested in himself as a South Indian man. And, so, we cannot expect anything more. However, I do believe that the experience of making that film and working with A.R. Rahman, who is, of course, Muslim, and has a very strong South Indian Muslim subjectivity in his work, and with Santosh Shivan, the cinematographer, they reappeared with Bombay, they reappeared with Dil Se, which is a truly radical film, truly radical. And I think that there is an evolution in Mani Ratnam's politics. It becomes better and better from my perspective, but the damage in a sense is done for the Kashmir discourse through Roja. You cannot unravel the fact that he made that film. So I hope that places his portrayal of Kashmiris in a stereotyped way in a particular frame vis-a-vis that film. And I think if you look at other regional cinemas using stereotypes around Kashmiris borrowed from the Bollywood trajectory, I think the answers will pretty much be the same. I would hazard a guess that because they are just using Kashmir to work out questions important for themselves, they are not really able to, they're trapped within the discourse and they're not able to produce a radical film on Kashmir.
Thank you so much, Ananya. And to your point, I think that those 3 films should be now sold as a box set.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Absolutely. Heidi, last question to you, and then you can also respond to this one because I think it's applicable to both of your expertise here. And I apologize to everyone. I know we're not able to get to every single question that's come across, but thank you so much for listening in and participating in this discussion. So the last question is, this came across on YouTube. Can you ask the guest about how intersections of caste and occupation of Kashmir come across in Bollywood? And so Heidi, I'll start with you.
A representation of caste.
Caste and occupation.
I don't know how relevant it is in the context of Kashmir, but perhaps it does play a big role in the context of Indian politics. How the villains' castes are, are put, how the names of the antagonists, the castes of antagonists are specific. How the state is represented. That does play a huge role in the larger Indian context, but specific to Kashmir, I don't know how caste plays a role, but religiously it does play a significant role. And as I said previously, and it was how Ananya previously said, that religiosity of Kashmiri Muslims and conflating it with Islamic terrorism, Islamic radicalism is definitely highlighted and sort of boomed at the audiences very strongly. At the same time, again, when the agency of Kashmiri is reduced, it's then reduced to a point of where it is devoid of any caste, religion, or its humanity, if I would say. It becomes a shell who is, sort of acting on the remotes of the masters across the border in Pakistan or elsewhere. So in that sense, yeah, that is how I would say it has been showcasing, and I don't think it's going to change for quite a long time, as long as uh, how there is this sort of an red line, Lakshman Rekha, of where you don't question the army, the state, or when it comes to the question of Pakistan. So there, even I think more liberal and more radical, directors or filmmakers would not want to delve into, and we won't see truly a film that would tackle head on, such a a big component of Kashmiri political military landscape. Yeah, Ananya can, yeah, take it.
Well, I mean, I agree that this is a bit of a googly of a question, Yeah, I'm just like, but I was pondering it while you were grappling with it bravely, the first instance. Actually, of course, I mean, Kashmiri society is very structured by caste. I mean, what about the Kashmiri Pandit? What about the high caste Ashraf Kashmiris? There is a lot of caste. There's a lot of caste-based politics on the micro level of Kashmir. The interesting thing is that, of course, it will never, I mean, we are talking about the lack of such basic respect for Kashmiri specificity in Bollywood, that how can we even get to that point where people are actually representing issues around caste? Because I do think that it is also whitewashed in Bollywood in general. We are not talking about caste. When we are talking about caste, we are talking about a homogenization of a sort of like general bland upper caste-ish, kind of middle class lifestyle, and people who are generally quite fair, and you know what I mean. I mean, this is a complete stereotyping of what is an Indian. So I think the true eruption again of a caste-based, a caste-sensitive lens for the occupation, perhaps, I mean, this is a utopian desire, but we are seeing a huge new movement of Dalitization, of thinking about caste from the other end of the spectrum, a new awareness. And we have it in politics too with Chandrasekhar Azad. We have so many interesting players today. Let's see where those alliances go. Can we hope that they can actually prize open new spaces for thinking about a more nuanced understanding of Kashmiri politics and culture, which doesn't shy away from the problems or the contestations for power and agency within Kashmir itself, which, like every other place, is a complex place. I mean, every place is complex, every society is complex, so is Kashmir. But we don't even have that understanding to get there yet. And so perhaps it will come to us through some other means. But again, as I say, it would be some kind of a TikTok revolution, maybe, rap singers revolution, YouTube revolution, but it may not use the camera in this hegemonic way. I think it can't. I think we have to look for something else. So we wait for that.
Thank you so much, Ananya. I want to give both of you a couple of minutes just to give some of your closing thoughts, and also some places that people can go to follow this discussion or continue with the education of themselves in this discussion and in this critical discourse. So Haris, I would like to start with you if you want to give us some closing remarks.
Yeah, I'll make a couple of quick comments. One is like how Bollywood is a very important soft power for India, and it has to emit a certain image of India and what happens in the larger politics of India, and it has to sort of emit that to the larger, wider audience, and it's growing. Films of Bollywood are now seen in China, so so for things to change in terms of how the narratives on Muslims and on Kashmir, I don't see that it was going to be a radical change. I think there is probably going to be a much larger shift where since 9/11, because of the Islamophobia and growth of far right nationalism across, so there is going to be more alliances on those lines. So pretty much grim situation I see on that front. But I think what has happened in last few years in Kashmir, especially because of the social media, even though it remains fertile for pretty much a large part of the year, is the ridiculization, how people are ridiculing the mainstream Indian Bollywood TV series on these, make these small memes and small TikTok videos ridiculing it, juxtaposing it with Kashmiri language and completely transforming how it appears to the audience. And I think what has happened in last, I think again 5-10 years, 5-6 years, not much before that, is the influence of other popular cinemas, global cinemas, Turkish, Korean, Netflix has made it possible for a lot of people to see movies from across different. So the influence of Bollywood and like Ananya was saying before, when she went to Kashmir, there was still a lot of positive sentiment for Bollywood. The people would still enjoy that. I think that has completely shifted, perhaps because of the space is now being taken by much more polished cinema from Korea, from Japan, from Turkey. Turkey cinema is quite, Iran, Persian cinema is cherished by a lot of people. So I think this space is being taken by other cinematic forms, and I think that's where I think perhaps you might see a change there. I remember a few years back, popular Iranian filmmaker Majid Majidi was having a project on Kashmir, which he, I think, perhaps left it halfway because he then supported Amir Bashir's Hardo for that. But so then there is an interest, perhaps, which might come in somewhere a few years down the line. We might see that change happening, if not within India, but elsewhere. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just, if I can, shall I just wrap up, Uma?
Yes, absolutely. I just want to follow up. Haris, do you have any suggestions? We've posted links to New Frame so people can read the articles that you have written, but is there any kind of other contextual spaces that you would want people to move to in the furtherance of this discussion? And you can also send them to me offline, and I will.
I can send it. I can't think of it right away, but yeah, if there is something, there are for sure, but I can't think of it immediately. Yeah.
Will do, and then we will definitely send them out. So thank you so much for that. And Ananya, please.
Sorry, yeah. No, of course. I think that's why we need these dialogues with people like Haris and others who are able to access the situation on the ground in Kashmir. And also, very importantly, the Kashmiri language, which, is such a source of this irony, humor, black humor, sarcasm. It's really potent. And only by going to Kashmir, I understood that. I could have never known that, not going there. So for me, this is like the source of the wealth, the basic wellspring of resistance, and also of trying to change the discourse. So what you said was about the humor and the kind of ridiculing. Even Achille Mbembe, in his very, very important book on the post-colony, which I opened my own book with, Mbembe talks about the need for this black humor on the ground, on the part of the ordinary person to resist the apparatus of the neo-colonial apparatus, and even that can be done on very level of very small body gestures, profanities, and this kind of like mockery, which is very devastating on the micro level, and it also gives a source of strength on the micro level also to the people at the receiving end of hegemony. So I think that what would be fantastic is, yes, that actually on the one hand we want those guerrilla tactics to remain guerrilla, because otherwise they will lose their potency. But somehow, for those of us who are interested in making that bridge between between what's on the ground and to opening people's eyes to that richness, for analysis, for creating larger platforms for counter discourse and so on, it would be great to have access to those forms so that we can also understand what's going on from a variety of perspectives. So I think we wait and watch, and there's a huge amount of the whole in cyberspace things are happening through, as you said, Netflix and TikTok and WhatsApp and whatnot. These are the new spaces where a kind of kani jung, to use the Kashmiri phrase, is happening, and that's the excitement. I think that's the hope too, at least for me. I'm always optimistic.
Thank you so much, Ananya. And thank you everybody who has joined us on YouTube, on Zoom, for those of you who are watching via Twitter as well. We appreciate everyone's participation in this, because it is only through this space of sitting in critical discourse and observing and learning and listening that we are really going to be empowered enough to help act and stand in solidarity with the people of Kashmir. So please stay tuned for more webinars in this series. We are working with the fantastic grassroots team at Stand With Kashmir to help produce more of these. So we will definitely let you know when the next one will be. Thank you so much to our two fantastic panelists today for this very critical discourse and dialogue. Ananya and Haris, thank you so much. And I appreciate taking the time today and for this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Uma.
Thank
You've got a great moderator. Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Stay safe, everybody.
Bye.
Take care. Thank you.
Bye. Bye, Haris. Bye.